Joining me now are three MPs from the different parties. Jaime Battiste is a Liberal MP for the Cape Breton riding of Sydney, Victoria, and the first Mi'kmaq to be elected to the House of Commons. Jamie Schmale is a Conservative MP for the Ontario riding of Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock, and his party's critic for Crown Indigenous Affairs. And Charlie Angus is the NDP MP for Timmins, James Bay, and critic for Indigenous Youth. All three of you, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I want to start with the press conference that we just saw today on Friday with the Prime Minister, and he addressed a week that's had a lot of Indigenous issues and reconciliation issues. He, for the first time, mentioned the possibility of Canada taking the Catholic Church to court to try and obtain documents that have so far not been disclosed with regards to residential schools. What should we make of that? Jaime Battiste.
I think that many parties have a role in reconciliation. The federal government has a role. Within the calls to action, there's 30 calls to action that actually talk about the province as well. I do think the Catholic Church has a role to play in this. As a Catholic myself, as an Indigenous person myself, it's one of those things that we need to find the truth. We need to give the survivors the closure and the justice that they deserve. And what we're looking at right now is how we can do that best. And it's not going to be a pan-Aboriginal or pan-Indigenous approach. What we really need to do is work with the regions of the 130 different residential schools across Canada and figure out how we can respectfully do this in a way that is acknowledging the customary protocols of those different nations, but at the same time ensuring that we find the truth and ensuring that we're doing everything that we can talk to the Catholic Council of Bishops and saying we need some answers for these survivors and we need some answers for all the Indigenous youth, and that's where we really need to focus on, is that reconciliation.
Okay, I guess the question is, though, was this just an off-the-cuff comment by the Prime Minister, or is this a serious thing that's been building? We heard Mark Miller, one of the ministers, earlier in the week referencing the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, and it's squarely on their shoulders. But has this been discussed in caucus, or has this been discussed seriously among your government about now formally going to court to try and get documents from the Vatican and from the higher instances of the Catholic Church?
Well, you might be aware that I can't disclose what happened in caucus.
But have there been discussions? Has this been something that's been breeded about, or is this just something off the cuff?
It's not something off the cuff, but I can't tell you what's going on in caucus. I'm sorry.
Okay, all right. No, that's fine. Jamie Schmale, what do you make of this latest development with regards to the Catholic Church?
Well, thank you. And Jaime's right on that one comment he made, how there's a lot of different facets to this. There's also the part about the Truth and Reconciliation reports, the calls to action, the calls to justice in the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls report, and how we get there. So I think there are a lot of moving parts in this, and we need to get answers, and we need to see action. And I think that's what Indigenous communities right now want, is action. And we, of course, mourn. I think the whole country mourns at the discovery of the 215 bodies in Kamloops. Should
there be more vigorous action, though, on the front of the Catholic Church? I'm going to speak a little later with a lawyer from Calgary who is leading a charge to try and bring this whole matter before the International Criminal Court, the ICC in The Hague. Should there be, on the part of the Government of Canada, more action, court action even, with regards to getting documents from the Catholic Church?
I'll leave that up to the government, what it wants to do, and then we'll also be presenting our plan. In the previous Parliament, you might recall there was a motion that the Catholic Church do apologize for their role. I supported that motion, and there's been, I think, a number of steps after that to try to get some healing to these communities that have been dealing with so much.
Okay, Charlie Angus, you're no newcomer to this. I know you have had discussions with Catholic Church officials on this. What's your position? Where do you think we stand with these latest developments, with this new public attention on this issue with regards to the Catholic Church?
Well, I think there's two things here that are really important. Certainly, I've met with the papal nuncio a couple of times. I brought the motion calling on the papal apology, and the Catholic Church has refused to turn over those documents. And I think we are at a point of looking at criminal investigations against the Oblates and a number of other orders. However, I find it interesting the Prime Minister saying this today on the same day that Mark Miller told Canadians that he was in secret negotiations with the survivors of St. Anne's residential school. That's false. That's a lie. They need to stop lying. The Prime Minister said he's not in court against Indigenous children. That's a lie. He needs to stop lying. So I think the Prime Minister recognizes that people are really angry at the church's failure, so maybe they're trying to deflect attention. But the issue is on Monday, we will be voting in Parliament, calling on Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to end the federal court cases on Jordan's principle, ending the fight against compensation, stop the obstruction of the Human Rights Tribunal that has 19 non-compliance orders, and we're giving them a timeline to call the survivors of St. Anne's Residential School and stop their toxic legal war and sit down. That is what reconciliation looks like. That is what Canadians will start to believe this Prime Minister really means it. And once we've got that down, then then let's talk about what the Catholic Church needs to do. But right now, we're not seeing honest answers from the Prime Minister.
Okay, well, that's interesting because that was my next question. On Monday, you all are going to, as MPs, be voting on that motion, your NDP motion, Charlie Angus, or one of your colleagues. Jaime Schmale, how will your Conservative caucus colleagues be voting on that NDP motion, asking for the government to fund forensic investigation of possible burial sites and, as Charlie has described, to cease and desist on these outstanding court actions?
We will be voting in favor of that NDP motion for a number of reasons. I think the community, I think Indigenous communities, I think Canadians in general want to see some action. And we have called for a number of the points in the NDP motion to be acted upon. As you just mentioned, the funding of the residential school sites to get direction from the communities themselves on what they want to do, but also start examining, because I think the very real possibility of more of these sites popping up is very real, and the government needs to bring closure to those families who are waiting for those answers.
Okay, Jaime Battiste, how will you and your Liberal colleagues be voting on that motion this Monday?
Well, I think I'm going to sit down with my Indigenous caucus. We have an Indigenous caucus within the Liberal government, and we're going to be having that discussion about whether we support it or not. I think that I think it's aspirational, and I think it's really good, the principles they're going with, especially around accelerating reconciliation. I've been someone who has, for much of my adult life, wrote about reconciliation, done presentations about it, taught about this. I think this is an important thing that we need to move forward on. I have to ask a little bit more questions around the court cases that we're currently going through. You know, there's a big point about the court cases is that, you know, they're meant to find the facts and figure out what we can do. I don't think I'll be voting against the motion for sure, but I just don't know where the rest of my Indigenous caucus or my caucus colleagues are at this point. So I can't really comment on that, but I do support the principles of it.
Is it going to be a free vote for your Liberal MPs?
I don't know that yet. I'll have to talk to the House leader. Okay.
And now all indications are it's going to pass because all of the opposition parties are going to vote for it. Do you think the government should act on it? I mean, I know you say that you're not sure about the aspects of it where it calls for the government, your government, to cease and desist the legal actions.
I think that we are taking the steps that move forward on reconciliation. You know, we've got royal assent on the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, which is really important. It's got all party support. I think that we need to move forward on reconciliation in a nonpartisan way. I look forward to talking with all parties about this and moving forward on it. It is an important issue in Canada. It's important in light of the 215 children's bodies that we've discovered this week, but past that, you know, we're going to be seeing more with the 130 residential schools. Marie Sinclair has told us that we have to be prepared to know that there's more bodies and that we all have a role to play in reconciliation. We're just starting to understand in the head and the information what Indigenous people have been telling us for years, if not generations. And so right now we're all feeling something about it, but it is within our hands to act. And that's what I said in the House during the emergency debate, that we really need to have action. And some of that is a part of the budget that we're in. Okay,
last word to Charlie on the motion.
Well, my colleague is not really aware of the court cases. I'm surprised. Canada was found guilty. This government was found guilty of willful and reckless. Those are the terms of willful and reckless discrimination. They said it was the worst case they'd seen. If the government had sat down 6 years ago, they wouldn't have been hit by the $40,000 per child compensation. They got hit by that because the government refused it every step of the way, and the Human Rights Tribunal said because of the overwhelmingly negative approach of this Trudeau government. And what the government is saying, and I asked my colleague to ask his Indigenous caucus about this, the government's position at the courts is that because Indigenous children, many of whom died in this broken system, suffered systemic discrimination, they aren't eligible for individual compensation. So imagine the principle that they're saying. If we can discriminate against an entire group of people just because they're Indigenous children, none of them are entitled to individual compensation.
Okay.
That's what the Prime Minister's put forward in court, and that's what the Liberals will be standing to say they support that vision, or they will be standing to say, no, we have to stop this toxic war against Indigenous children and do the right thing. So that's going to be their choice on Monday.
Okay, on that note, we will all watch with great interest that vote on Monday, but we'll watch also this whole issue, and I want to thank all three of you. Thanks very much for taking part, and have a good weekend.
Thanks for having us.